I was the maid in my own family's mansion, humiliated, ignored, and broken. But while they laughed, I built. And one day, I owned it all. They treated me like a servant in my own home. I stayed silent, but silence became my power. This is how I turned their cruelty into my revenge. Don't skip this. Watch till the end to see how the maid they mocked became the woman who took everything back. I still remember the way the air smelled that morning, sharp with rain and roses from my mother's garden. She loved those roses more than the house itself. And maybe that's why I couldn't move when they started cutting them down the week after her funeral. The house was quiet, but not peaceful. More like it was holding its breath, waiting for me to disappear. Aunt Carmen's heels clicked against the marble floor as she walked in, perfume thick and artificial. "Isabella," she said, her voice dripping with false warmth. "We've been talking, and your mother's estate is complicated. You'll stay with us for a while. It's what family does." Family. That word used to mean something. I nodded because my throat had gone dry. She smiled, satisfied, and handed me a small black suitcase, my suitcase, already packed. "We've arranged everything," she said. "You'll be comfortable." But comfort wasn't what I found. Her mansion was a world of chandeliers and cold smiles. I was given a tiny room in the servants' wing, a space that smelled like detergent and damp towels. The wallpaper peeled at the corners. The bed sagged in the middle. On my first night there, I cried into my pillow, biting the fabric so no one would hear. But tears were useless. They didn't bring back my mother or the life I'd lost. The next morning, my aunt knocked once before walking in. "You'll help around the house," she said briskly. "We can't have you lying around all day. The staff will show you what to do." Her tone wasn't cruel. It was worse. It was casual, like this was normal, like it made sense for me, the niece she once spoiled with Christmas gifts and birthday hugs, to now fold her laundry and mop her floors. I wanted to scream, but instead, I smiled and said softly, "Of course, Aunt Carmen." That's how it started, not with thunder or rage, but with silence. Over the months, silence became my armor. I scrubbed, cooked, polished, and disappeared. They treated me like I was invisible, and I let them, because invisibility gave me something I'd never had before, freedom to observe. I saw everything they didn't want anyone to see. Uncle Lorenzo's late-night calls about missing payments. My cousin Lucia crying in her room after maxing out another credit card. And Aunt Carmen ripping up letters from the bank before her husband could see them. They thought I was too small to notice, too broken to understand. But I was learning. Every secret, every crack in their perfect walls. I was collecting them quietly, piece by piece. At night, I'd sit by the window in my tiny room, whispering to my mother's memory. "I'm still here," I'd say. "I'll make you proud. Just watch me." I didn't know it yet, but that night was the beginning. The day I lost my home was also the day I started building my empire in silence. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into seasons. What started as helping around the house became my full-time identity. Their live-in maid who didn't get paid, didn't complain, and didn't matter. I swept floors that used to shine beneath my mother's heels. I polished silver I once ate from. I even ironed my cousin Lucia's dresses that still had my old initials stitched inside, because they once belonged to me. Every time I held that fabric, something inside me burned. But I learned to smile through the fire. "Thank you, Isabella," Lucia would say, barely glancing at me. "You're so good with your hands." "Yes," I'd answer quietly. "I've had a lot of practice." She didn't hear the double meaning. None of them ever did. They thought I was fading, that humiliation was erasing me. But every moment they tried to shrink me, I was rebuilding myself in secret. At night, when everyone was asleep, I sat cross-legged on the cold floor with a used laptop I'd bought with the little money I made selling my mother's old jewelry. The screen flickered, sometimes freezing, but it was my window to freedom. I watched videos about business, finance, and marketing. I took free online courses with subtitles because I couldn't afford the premium version. I didn't just want to survive. I wanted to understand how the world really worked. It became my secret ritual. Clean by day, learn by night. One evening, as I was folding laundry in the hallway, I overheard Aunt Carmen talking on the phone. Her voice was low and tense. "No, I told you. We'll cover the payments next quarter," she hissed. "Lorenzo doesn't need to know yet." My heart quickened. Payments. Debt. Loans. The perfect family with their perfect mansion wasn't as untouchable as they pretended to be. Later that night, I wrote everything down in a notebook. Dates, names, little fragments of information I caught while pretending to be invisible. I didn't know what I'd do with it yet, but I knew it mattered. Months later, Lucia threw a birthday party for herself, a masquerade. I wasn't invited, of course, but I helped prepare everything. The decorations, the catering, the music. When the guests arrived, dressed like royalty, I hid behind the kitchen door, peeking through the gap. That's when I saw him, Daniel. He wasn't family. He was an investor, a quiet man in a gray suit, polite but observant. The kind who noticed details. He spoke to Aunt Carmen in low tones about restructuring and short-term liquidity. I recognized those words from the finance lessons I'd been taking. And that's when I realized something powerful. Knowledge was a weapon, and I was sharpening mine. After the guests left, I stayed to clean. In the library, I found a folder left behind on the table, balance sheets, letters from the bank, an unpaid tax notice. My hands trembled as I flipped through them. They were drowning in debt. The mansion, the cars, the parties, all of it was smoke. I stared at the papers, and for the first time in years, I smiled, because they had turned me into their maid. But the truth? I was becoming something far more dangerous, the woman who knew their secrets. That night, as I tucked the papers back where I found them, I whispered under my breath, "You taught me to serve, Aunt Carmen. But you forgot. Even servants learn where the silver is kept." It's strange how quiet revenge begins, not with shouting or fire, but with the sound of a laptop key clicking in the dark. By day, I was still the maid who polished their marble floors and folded their pride into crisp, clean linens. But by night, I was someone else, someone my aunt and uncle would never recognize. I became a student of the world they thought I was too stupid to understand. Every evening, I sat by the dim light of a bedside lamp, notebook open, eyes aching. I studied financial literacy, business management, marketing psychology, words that used to sound like they belonged to another universe. I was building my mind brick by brick, same as I'd once built their perfect dinners. One night, Lucia caught me reading. "What are you doing?" she asked, leaning on the doorframe. "Just learning," I said quietly, closing the laptop. "Learning?" She smirked. "You think reading some online courses will change your life? Isabella, you're sweet, but you're just not one of us." Her laughter was soft but sharp, like a knife wrapped in silk. I didn't reply, because she was right. I wasn't one of them. Not anymore. And I didn't want to be. That night, I made my first real decision. I took a small risk. I sold a vintage bracelet, one of my mother's, and used the money to buy materials for handmade linen sets and embroidered napkins. My mother had taught me how to sew before she died. It felt like she was guiding my hands again. I listed them online under a fake name, Bell and Company. At first, there were no sales, not even a single like, but I kept posting. I took photos near the mansion's window, where the morning light hit perfectly. Then one day, ding, a sale. Someone from San Francisco bought 2 napkin sets for $45. I almost cried holding that little notification on my screen. It wasn't about the money. It was the validation, the whisper that said, "You can build your way out of this." Over the next few months, I reinvested every dollar. My small brand began to grow quietly, one customer at a time. I worked in silence, packaging orders in the servants' pantry after everyone had gone to bed. While Aunt Carmen bragged about her charity galas and Lorenzo tried to impress investors with borrowed luxury, I built something real, something mine. Then one night, I overheard a conversation that made my blood run cold. "I told you, Carmen." Uncle Lorenzo snapped, pacing the living room. "We can't keep refinancing the estate. The bank's on our back." "It's temporary," she insisted. "We'll sell some stocks. Maybe that smaller property in Pasadena." "And what about this one?" he shouted, gesturing toward the mansion. "If things don't turn around, we'll lose everything." I froze behind the doorway, heart pounding. Lose everything? That's when I realized fate had handed me a chance. The very people who treated me like dirt were about to crumble under their own greed. That night, as I sat by my window again, the city lights stretching far below, I whispered, "Mama, I think this is it, the start of my rise." Because while they were busy pretending to be rich, I was busy becoming unstoppable. The first time I truly understood how fragile their world was, I was carrying a silver tray of tea for Aunt Carmen in the drawing room. She was on the phone, speaking in hushed tones, voice sharp, almost desperate. "Yes, the bank knows about the missed payment," she said, tapping her perfectly manicured fingers on the mahogany table. "No, I've handled it. Lorenzo doesn't need to find out. Everything's fine."
Fine. Huh.
I didn't move. I didn't breathe. But every word she said carved a blueprint into my mind. Dates, names, deadlines, the cracks no one else could see. Later that night, I sat on my bed with my notebook, writing furiously.
Debt.
Unpaid taxes.
Loans.
Property at risk. I had learned more about their empire than any family member thought I could. They were fragile. Their mansion wasn't invincible. And their arrogance, that dangerous, delicious arrogance, would be their undoing. I also noticed small things, little habits, secrets, slips of pride. Uncle Lorenzo drank more than he let on. Aunt Carmen hid letters from lawyers in drawers behind mirrors. My cousins spent money they didn't have, laughing as though it would never run out. I realized they were blind to one crucial thing. I was patient. I was silent. I was watching. The more I learned, the more I built my secret empire. My little business grew steadily. I reinvested profits into materials, better tools, and online advertising. Every time I packaged an order in the pantry, I imagined a future where I could walk into that mansion and claim it without shouting, without fighting, without anyone expecting it. One evening, my cousin Lucia approached me in the laundry room. Her silk scarf fell around her neck like a halo she didn't deserve. "Isabella, why do you spend so much time at that computer?" she asked, feigning curiosity. "I'm learning," I said simply, folding her blouse. She rolled her eyes. "You'll never be like us. You'll always be you." I smiled politely. Maybe that's exactly why I'm learning.
She didn't understand.
None of them did. Weeks later, I found an old ledger in the library. The pages were yellowed, handwritten, full of numbers that didn't add up. Mistakes, oversights, forgotten signatures. The perfect recipe for collapse. I tucked it into my bag, careful to leave everything else as I found it. I didn't need to confront them yet. Patience was stronger than confrontation. And so I waited. I cleaned. I studied. I sold. I saved. Every night, I whispered to my mother's memory, "I see everything now. I'm ready, Mama. One day, they'll see me too, not as a servant, but as the woman they tried to erase." Because I understood the most important secret of all. The higher they climbed, the harder they would fall, and I would be standing at the bottom, quietly building the ladder to rise above them. The night I made my first real move, the mansion was silent except for the faint hum of the city outside. The chandeliers glimmered as if mocking me, reminding me how small I once felt in these rooms. I had spent months watching, learning, and building. Every invoice, every debt notice, Every slip of carelessness had been carefully recorded in my notebook. And now I was ready to test the first domino. It started small. I sent a carefully worded email under my fake business name to one of the boutique suppliers my aunt relied on. Nothing obvious, just a subtle delay request, a slight error in the order, enough to make them scramble. By morning, Aunt Carmen was panicked. "The shipment hasn't arrived," she hissed at Lorenzo over the phone. "What do you mean it's delayed? We needed it for the gala." I was polishing silver in the hallway, invisible, listening. My heart thudded in my chest. But I didn't move. I just smiled inside. For months, I had been the shadow in their home, the quiet maid they barely noticed. But now, that shadow had teeth. I followed the pattern meticulously. A delayed payment here, a misfiled document there, all carefully orchestrated to expose the cracks in their empire without touching them directly. I watched Aunt Carmen's confidence waver, Lorenzo's irritation grow, and my cousin's arrogance falter. Lucia, of course, still thought I was harmless. "You're always in everyone's way, Isabella," she complained one evening. "Why can't you just stay quiet?" "Because sometimes quiet is louder than noise," I said softly, stacking napkins that were already folded perfectly. That night, I checked my online orders. My little business had grown steadily, small but steady enough to give me confidence. Every sale felt like fuel, every happy customer a reminder that I could create value while they teetered on the edge of ruin. Weeks passed. The family's small empire started to wobble. A shipment was late. A client complaint escalated. A forgotten tax notice finally demanded attention. And every time, I stayed invisible, quietly observing the chaos I had helped nudge forward. And in that invisibility, I felt power, not the loud, arrogant power they flaunted, but the quiet, patient, unshakable power of someone who had nothing to lose and everything to gain. I whispered into the night, looking out at the mansion's walls. "They'll see me soon, Mama. They'll see me for who I really am." By now, I had learned how to move through the mansion without being noticed, how to fold myself into the background while watching the empire crumble from the inside. Each mistake they made, each misstep in their finances, fed my resolve. I was no longer the scared, obedient girl who polished their silver in silence. I was patient, smart, and ready. My business, Bell and Company, had grown beyond what I dared hope for. Orders came daily, and the profits allowed me to invest in small properties, rentals, and shops that gave me independence and leverage. I never flaunted it, never celebrated in front of them. But every time a payment arrived in my account, it was like a tiny victory over the people who had tried to erase me. One evening, Aunt Carmen called me into the drawing room. "Isabella, I need you to organize the archives. The lawyer is coming tomorrow. Everything must be perfect." I nodded, suppressing a smirk. Perfect. That's exactly what I wanted. I spent hours sifting through old documents, cross-referencing ledgers, and taking discreet notes. What I found astounded me. Unpaid property taxes, risky loans, overvalued assets, and legal loopholes they'd neglected. Their pride had made them sloppy. Their arrogance had made them predictable. The next morning, I quietly contacted a financial advisor, under my own name this time, and asked about buying distressed properties. I didn't mention the family. I didn't need to. I already had the map to their vulnerabilities, and I was about to make them my stepping stone. Weeks passed, and little by little, I began acquiring assets they didn't even realize I was buying. A property here, a small commercial space there. Each acquisition gave me not just money but leverage, knowledge that I could someday walk into the mansion and claim my rightful place. One night, as I returned to my tiny room in the servants' wing, I overheard Aunt Carmen on the phone. "I don't understand how we're falling behind so fast. We've done everything right, everything." I smiled softly to myself. They had never considered the quiet girl in the back room, the one they ignored, the one they mocked. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was rising. And when the time came, I would be unstoppable. I whispered into the darkness. Patience, Mama. Everything is falling into place.
Soon they'll see me.
Soon, I'll take back everything that's mine. The day finally arrived when I stopped being invisible. I walked through the front gates of the mansion. Not as the maid, not as the shadow they had trained themselves to ignore, but as a woman who owned more than they ever imagined. Every step on the marble floor felt like a heartbeat of triumph. I had been patient. I had been quiet. And now I held the power. Aunt Carmen looked up from the living room table, her face pale, her hands trembling over a stack of overdue invoices. Isabella, she whispered, as though saying my name might break the spell. Yes, I said, my voice steady, full of the strength I had built over years of humiliation. It's me, and you're going to listen very carefully. Uncle Lorenzo froze, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. My cousins shrank back, wide-eyed, unsure if they were dreaming. I handed the lawyer's papers across the table. The legal documents showing that I had acquired the mansion through a combination of purchased shares, unpaid debts, and liens I had quietly executed over the past months. You didn't notice the cracks, I said softly, almost kindly. But I did. I built while you crumbled. And now, this house belongs to me. Aunt Carmen's lips quivered, a mixture of anger, fear, and disbelief. You can't do this, she cried. Oh, I can, I replied. And I did. For the first time in years, I felt no fear, no doubt, just a calm, powerful certainty. Every insult, every mocking laugh, every sleepless night they had inflicted on me came rushing back, and it fueled the quiet satisfaction blooming inside me. Lucia tried to protest. But we lived here. It's ours. I smiled, shaking my head.
No.
It was mine always. You just made the mistake of treating me like I was nothing. And now, nothing has become everything. They had tried to make me small, to erase me, and I had let them think they had succeeded. But invisibility had been my weapon, patience my strategy, knowledge my shield. As they stumbled back, I walked through the halls I had once cleaned. Now, with the authority of ownership, I touched the walls gently, remembering my mother, remembering the little girl I used to be. And I whispered to myself, You see, Mama? I told you I'd rise. It wasn't revenge in the form of anger or cruelty. It was perfect, quiet justice. The house, the wealth, the respect. I reclaimed it all without fighting, without yelling. I simply became what I was meant to be. The mansion was quiet again, but this time, it was my quiet. I walked through the halls, touching the familiar carved banisters, breathing in the scent of polished wood and faint traces of orange blossoms. It smelled like home, finally my home. The rooms where I had once scrubbed floors in silence now belonged to me. Every corner, every shadow, every light-filled window. I thought about the years I had spent invisible, the nights I had cried into my pillow, and the days I had swallowed humiliation with a smile. And I realized something profound. Those years weren't wasted. They had taught me patience, resilience, and the subtle art of strategy. They had shaped me into the woman I had become. Aunt Carmen and Uncle Lorenzo had begged, pleaded, and shouted, but I had answered with calm and careful planning. I had learned that revenge doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, it waits. It grows quietly until it becomes unstoppable. I called my lawyer to finalize the remaining papers. My cousins lingered at the edges of the room, unsure whether to leave or stay. I didn't shout, I didn't humiliate them. I simply said, This house is mine now. Treat it with respect or leave. They saw, finally, the girl they had thought was nothing. And in that moment, I understood the true power of patience. Later, I sat in my mother's favorite chair by the window. The city lights twinkled outside, but I felt the warmth of the sun, the memory of love, and the weightless joy of victory. This story isn't just about reclaiming a mansion or proving people wrong. It's about finding strength when everyone else wants to diminish you, about learning in silence, and about letting life itself give the revenge it owes. I had been the maid in my own home. I had been invisible, dismissed, and forgotten. But I rose. I built. I reclaimed. And now I was free. Never let anyone define your worth. Silence can be strength. Patience can be power. And even in the darkest moments, your rise is possible. Your story, your life, and your voice belong to you. And one day, the world will see it too.